Hi, my name is Nan Cohen and I'm with Light Productions, and I want to welcome you to another evening with Maverick Rabbi Gershon Winkler. Gershon comes to us here in Missoula from rural New Mexico, and he will speak to us about world-changing events. What? And now here's Gershon.
I want to open up with a nice little chant for you, from me to you, as that's how I like to open up. It's a very short chant. Okay. Well, we were always on the run in ancient times, so try to keep it short. You know. Here we come again. Yaakov levado vayavek ishimo varanor hashachar Niskavato nelevado bayom ahu Niskavato nelevado bayom ahu Levate Yaakov levado vayavek ishimo varanor hashachar Hello, my name is Gershon. I'm here to entertain you tonight with a lot of jokes and history and mystery. I like that, jokes, history, and mystery. I want to make 3 points tonight. I'm going to write them down for you immediately. There we go. And there they are. Please make a note of them. Some of you may want them in Hebrew. Or in the Samaritan script. It goes something like this. And that is...
How about in the Kmart script?
Are there any other questions? Your questions are important to me. There's a teaching in the Talmud, Lo ha-baishan lomed v'lo ha-kaptan malamed, which means the shy one cannot learn and the arrogant one cannot teach. You like that? Okay, should I write that?
That's okay.
All right, so it's about the whole terrible things that are going on in our world today, especially, well, I shouldn't say especially, because there are a lot of tragedies that are happening around the world, far worse than what's happening in the Middle East, but we don't get a lot of headlines about them. You see them in little clippings, 50,000 million people killed by, a lawnmower running amok, or we don't read about that and what's happening in Tunisia or in other places in the world where great, horrible things are happening. But we're going to talk about a little bit about the Middle East because, and theologically, spiritually, historically, because I understand that there was a speaker that was invited to Montana to speak about it and spoke about it only from one side. And of course, this is the other side, I guess. I mean, it's just sad to me that when they have these discussions and invite these speakers, and this happens around the country in general, they seem to really love to take the side of the more exotic one. You know, people are used to Jews all the time, hanging out in Walmart and Kmart. But when somebody comes speaking for the Palestinian side, it's something wow, something novel and sexy and exotic, and certainly we have to go and do that. I have very close friends who are Palestinians in Israel, in the West Bank, rather. You know, I mean, I have Palestinian Arabs, like any other Arabs that I have befriended, very beautiful people, incredibly beautiful people, very good people. And you know what? I have some Jewish friends too in Israel who are very good people too. And they're both on the side of not understanding why the coexistence can't happen, but yet they know why it's not happening, and that's because there are people in power, and then there are the fundamentalists, zealots, who just will not allow it to happen because it will spoil their whole reason for living. Now, why do that to anybody? You've got to have a cause in life. What happens if there is peace? What are the people in Hamas going to do? Huh? Nothing to fight anymore. They're going to be stuck with all these weapons with nothing to do with them. They're going to have to go out and find a job, live a life. They won't get all this money from all the neighboring Arab countries who have done absolutely nothing to help the Arab refugees except funding them to buy weapons. Meanwhile, families who don't want to fight, Palestinian mothers and children and men who don't want to be fighting anybody, have no food. This is long before the Intifada and the sieges and all that stuff. You know, living in poverty. Where do they find work? In Israel. They come to Israel. We in Israel allow them to have jobs. We have Palestinian doctors in our hospitals. We have Palestinian Arabs working in our construction sites. We have jobs available for people who come across the border. And what have the fellow Arab countries done for them? So these poor, hapless refugees that they're always complaining about, that Israel has caused back in 1948, well, they send them a lot of money too to buy guns and bombs. And of course, if you read the papers or listen to the news about what they found, the documents that demonstrate where all that money had gone. So people live in dire poverty, except for the leadership who have very lavish places. No more, because the Israelis, you know, their tanks, they couldn't stop them in time, and they ran down the buildings. So they don't have any more lavish offices. But they'll get more money to build them again from the same people who have been sending them money all these years for weaponry. I'm going to share with you a little bit of history of this. But first I want to say this. This is not going to be an evening of taking any sides either, but it's going to be an evening of trying to bring a little clarification, theologically, historically, spiritually, so we can all walk out of here tonight in great peace, and all wear peace signs, and love each other, and all that stuff. You know, there's a story about this great Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem. You know, he was a great teacher who lived in the 1700s. Great Hasidic master. In fact, he was the Hasidic sect of our people evolved out of his teachings back in the early 1700s. So the story is that two people came to him, two litigants came to him, and they said, you know, they had a dispute over some land. The guy said, the land belongs to me. And the other one said, no, it don't. It belonged to me. I have the deed, and he had a deed. Everybody had deeds. So Rabbi Yisrael listened to the one litigant. One, what do you call that in lawyer language? Claimant, defendant, claimant, plaintiff. I don't know, one of those guys, and said, very, very good point. Your proof is impeccable. Now let's hear your side of the story. The other man told him his side of the story, and again, Rabbi Israel, in the rabbinic way, said, you're totally, you seem to be in the right as well. So then Rabbi Israel said to them, I'll tell you what, I've heard your side, and I've heard your side, now let me hear what the earth has to say. And he actually got down on his floor, as the story goes, and put his ears to the earth. These two guys are saying, oh my God, what do we come here for? We should have gone to the civil court. At least we could sit in folding chairs. So the guy is down there on the earth, and he's listening. It's taking a long time, The earth is very slow. It's taking billions of years to evolve and to grow grass and stuff and giraffes. So he was there for like a long time on the floor. They didn't know what to do. Should they go home? Should they cancel this? This is ridiculous. They have heard crazy things about the guy. After all, he is a rabbi. And so they just waited patiently and said, well, in respect to him, we'll hang around. And finally the rabbi got off the ground and he said to them, I'm sorry. She says that she does not belong to neither of you, but that you belong to her. So they left and went to somebody else. So here's a little history, just history. This is not from a Jewish history book. This is from actually a history book written by a great German historian in Europa. And of course it corroborates with a lot of Jewish history books, except he has his living there a lot longer than our history books has his living there. That's fine. We don't mind that. So as a fact, the Jewish people have been living in Israel since 1738 before cable. 1738 BCE. According to some historians, like this guy, and this is in the Timetables of History by Bernard Grun, published by Simon & Schuster in 1991, other historians, date the earliest Jewish settlement in what we call today Israel, 2100 BCE. So it's a little bit longer than our records indicate. So, we were a little sloppier in record keeping than Mr. Grun. We then migrated to Egypt in 1523 BCE because of a famine. There was a great famine in the land that was at that time called the land of Canaan, Canaan. It's interesting, the ancient rabbis point out that Canaan, literally means Kan Oni, which means here, there ain't nothing. It's a really weird thing. I mean, like in our story, Abraham, who was, the first, the father of the Hebrew people, or that part that became the Jewish people of the Hebrew people, settled there in 1738 BCE, 2100 BCE, according to the more secular historians. And he was told in his vision, he was told, go to this land that I will, promise that you can settle there and your descendants will be able to settle there. It'll be your land and your descendants' land. He gets there and there's no food. And he has to go down to Egypt to eat. It's like there's nothing there. He comes there, he says, thank you, God, it's a very nice place. There are a lot of rocks here. I like rocks. I collect rocks. Good place. I want to stay here. Then when God wasn't looking, he went down to Egypt to eat. Now finally, after 3 generations, they went down to Egypt during Joseph's time. The story, you saw the many petticoated, whatever it's called, many-colored, what's it called? Dream-coat of Joseph, I don't know, what a play, a movie. Technicolor something, yeah, right, of Joseph. So Joseph, who is the son of Jacob, who is the son of Isaac, who is the son of Abraham, ends up in Egypt through a whole long weird thing where his brothers sell him because he needs some money for poker, and then they throw him in a pit, they sell him to some Midianites, who then sell him to the Ishmaelites, who then sell him to the Egyptianites, and the Termites, the Dolomites, and all the mites get together, and Joseph eventually ends up as a slave, and then his master's wife tries to seduce him because he's a really good-looking guy. I mean, you should have seen the movie, you know. I think it was what, Richard Gere played Joseph. So then, Donny Osmond was it? Okay, sorry. Donny Osmond played Joseph, so you understand why that happened. And then Joseph ends up in jail because, you know, she screams, and when he refuses, she screams that, you know, accuses him of trying to rape her, and they put him in jail, and the Pharaoh's ministers are thrown in jail that day too because there was a fly in the soup or the wine. It goes on, a whole nice, wonderful story. And Joseph ends up interpreting their dreams. When they get out of jail, they tell the Pharaoh there's this guy who knows how to interpret dreams because Pharaoh had a bad dream, and so they take him out of jail, and he tells Pharaoh that there's going to be a great famine in the land of Egypt, and he has some ideas of how to save Egypt from the famine. He becomes a great minister. Meanwhile, in Canaan, what's happening in Canaan? There's no food. Of course. That's the story. Constant theme in our story. No food. That's why we Jews eat all the time. You know, we don't want to take no chances. Who knows when the next time is going to happen, right? And Egypt is so far away, you can't get there anyway. You got to have all these visas and passports to get there. So we eat a lot. You store up, make good knishes and good gefilte fish and good stuff. We have reasons. Okay, so then we get to the people in Canaan who are the 11 boys, you know, the 11 brothers, and Dinah, their sister, and Jacob, the old man, the father, and Leah, and Bilhah, and Zilpah, you know, his wife, his surviving wife, Leah, and his two girlfriends, Bilhah and Zilpah. They were Pilakshim, half-wives, not really married, just living together with them. So they all come down and to get food. You know, eventually they all move down to Egypt. Jacob finds out Joseph is alive after Joseph finally tells his brothers when they come to get food. You can read the whole thing. It's in these books that appear in the Super 8 night table. So now the Hebrew people, which is a small bunch of tribes, of little clans that are developing under these brothers, each brother becomes the head of a clan, they now end up in Goshen, which is in Egypt along the Nile. And there they live for about, you know, a bunch of years, like a century practically, before they're made into slaves, because new regimes arise, and they're afraid these strange people with these strange customs, you know, are going to support any enemy that would come in, and therefore they decree that they should be taxed heavily, and after they're being taxed heavily, they're made slaves, and one thing after another, they end up becoming slaves. Our ancestors were actually enslaved for 116 years total. So for 210 years, we are in Egypt, and and 116 of those years we are enslaved, like really slaves. No more freedom, no more rights. In 1313 BCE, we leave Egypt through Charlton Heston, who then takes us out of Egypt, and we arrive in the land of our ancestors, where we had been living all the way until we got stuck in Egypt. We were living there for, you know, since 2100 BCE or 1738 BCE. So we go back there. We arrive back there at 1273 BCE, which is about 40 years in the journey after we leave Egypt. So total, if we count from the time of Abraham, you know, minus, subtracting the 210 years that we were in Egypt, that we were not home, you know, we had been living in that country 3,530 years. So claims which are going on today, because we have been living, what I'm saying is we've been living in that land since that time. On and on and on and on. People think that when the Romans came in 2,000 years ago and destroyed our temple and we went into exile, that all the Jews went into exile. That's not true. History indicates that Jews always lived in the land of Israel. We had the Jerusalem Talmud, we had the Babylonian Talmud. We had Jews flourishing in Babylon, which was Persia, Iraq, and we had Jews flourishing in Rome and Greece in the exile, and we had Jews continually flourishing and teaching and growing in the land of whatever they called it. They called it the Eretz HaPlishtim, the Philistine land, the Palestine land, rather. The Romans, I think the Romans called it Judea, right? Everybody gave them a different name depending on who conquered us. Some conquerors called it Miami, Paramus. There are many different names that were given to our land. But we always were living there. Jews were always living there. So claims that come up these days by well-meaning speakers that the Jews, and in the newspapers and in interviews, that the Jews are not indigenous to this land that is in conflict. The Arabs are indigenous, but we're not indigenous. It's like Euro-Americans saying to the flathead, "You're not indigenous. We are. This is our land. Because you're a minority, we kicked you out a long time ago, or whatever, and you're not indigenous to this place, but we'll give you a nice place to live over there." So this is a very important fact, that we have been living there ever since the time of Abraham, minus 210-year vacation we took to eat and to become slaves. This was our vocation. You want to become slaves. Look, if you eat a lot, you got to become a slave. That's the big deal. So it's not that we challenge, the Jewish people or the Israeli government or the Israelis or whatever you want to call the different forms in which Jewish people are manifested these days in the Middle East, never and does not claim that Arabs have no right to live there. Our beef is that they have no right to deny us the right to live there. We've always lived there. In fact, we've lived there longer than the Muslim population has. And then they claim is also, they came in 1948 and they made settlements, or after 1967 they made settlements after the Six-Day War in territory that was once Palestinian Arab territory. And this is so untrue in terms of this being a reason for the big fight against Israel. Because the terrorism against the Israelis, against the Jews living in Israel, was going on long before 1967. Long before we took these territories during a war that we did not start in 1967. But I'll go a little chronologically. Chronologically, how does it go? I don't know. Let's talk about a little chronology here. Okay, so Jews are living in Israel under different rules, different rulers, different sovereignties. The Jews in Arabia, living among the Arabians, Jews lived in Arabia too for many centuries, were flourishing beautifully, freely, richly. They were warriors. They had their own chiefs. They had their own clans. It wasn't until the rise of the new religion in the 7th century under Muhammad that these tribes were eradicated because they refused to join Muhammad. In fact, they fought against Muhammad, joining other tribes, other pagan tribes, because we loved pagans, because the pagans treated us good. We have hardly in our history ever had a problem living with pagans or serving or living under a pagan culture as much as we had living under the religious cultures that evolved in latter-day times. The pagans were great, even in Rome. The church began with Constantine. The Christianity began to spread with Constantine in about the 4th century, and the Jews began to get 2nd class, 3rd class, 4th class persecution. You can't do this, can't do that. And then, after a few Caesars later, there's what? There's a guy named Julian, was it? Or Justinian? What was he? He was a pagan emperor that suddenly, he treated the Jews royally. He gave them freedom. We love the guy. We name all of our rooms in our homes after him. After he was, his reign was pretty short-lived, and he kicked the bucket, and then we went back to the bad way of living. Same thing in Arabia. In Arabia, we lived as free-flowing tribes, the Jews who lived in Arabia. In 624, between 624 and 628, these Jewish tribes in Arabia were wiped out. In 638, the new religion, the Muslims, now come and conquer Jerusalem. A large mosque is built in 661 on the temple site, the site of the temple of our people, the Jewish site. Jewish property is confiscated in Jerusalem and redistributed to the new Arab settlers who now come into Jerusalem under this new caliph who comes in and conquers Jerusalem in 661. In 850, a few hundred years later, everything begins to fall apart in terms of, do you know the yellow star that the Jews wore, during the Holocaust or before the Holocaust, leading to the Holocaust? Well, that was invented in the year 850, when the Muslim rulers of Babylon, which is Iraq, Iran, required all Jews of Babylon to wear a yellow patch. In 1004, in Israel, Jews are forced to convert to Islam, and the synagogues are burned down. In Egypt, the Jews are ordered to wear also insignia on their clothes. 1099, Jerusalem is conquered by the Crusaders. Next! Come on in, next! Here we go again. Okay, now the Muslims are driven out, and the Christians come in, the Crusaders come in, and 1148, we go now to Europe because nothing's happening in Israel for a while. We're living under the Byzantine and later the Crusaders, and everything is really cute. In 1148, going up to Europe and Spain, a fanatic Islamic sect takes over Córdoba, Spain, destroys synagogues. The Jews are forced to convert to Islam, which some do while practicing Judaism secretly, and others flee. Maimonides, one of the great teachers, great rabbis of that time, he settles in Fez, Morocco. He was in Spain. He had to leave Spain because of the pogroms against the Jews. He settles in Morocco, where campaigns to convert the Jews to Islam stir up again, and he has to leave there, and goes to Egypt, where the Muslims leave him alone, because the Muslims in Egypt were nice to us. And he became a great physician to the Sultan of Egypt. In 1187, Jerusalem was recaptured by Maimonides' friend, Saladin of Egypt. 1198, well, Saladin's rule is still going on in Jerusalem, but in North Africa things are changing for the Jews. Jews must wear special dress. In 1232, the Jews of Marrakesh, Morocco, are massacred. In 1244, Jerusalem is invaded by the Turks and the Egyptians. Jews are massacred and expelled. Many Jews are killed and forced to convert to Islam in Morocco. About 15 years later, in 1250, the Jews of Tunisia have to wear special badges. 1293, many Jews in Iraq have to forced to convert to Islam. In 1516, Israel is conquered again, this time by the Turkish Ottoman Empire. In 1641, Jews across Persia are forcibly converted to Islam, but continue to practice Judaism in secret. In 1678, Yemenite Jews, the Jews of Yemen, are expelled, and their synagogues demolished. In 1720, in Jerusalem, under the Turks, under their rule, one of the greatest synagogues in Jerusalem is broken into, the Ashkenazi synagogue it was called. The Torah scrolls are burned, the Jews flee, they're never allowed to return for a long time. In Morocco, 50 Jews in Afran in 1791 are burned alive because they refused to convert to Islam. In 1831, a great Islamic warrior named Muhammad Ali. Didn't know there was a guy named that, huh? Thought it was a boxer. No, there was a great warrior in 1831 named Muhammad Ali. He was really good to us. He captures recaptures Israel from the Turks. And he lets us live in peace. He likes us. He even sits with our leaders, our teachers, and we have a good time. We had falafel together. Everything works good. It was good under Muhammad Ali. In 1839, Jews of Meshed, Persia, are killed in anti-Jewish pogroms. The survivors forced to convert to Islam, and they practiced Judaism in secret, according to the record. In 1840, Turkish rule is restored in Israel. Muhammad Ali is out. Goodbye, Muhammad. Your time in the ring is out. Okay, now we come to the beginning of the contemporary problem. 1870 happens. The Jews are having a very bad time in Russia. Many pogroms against the Jews by everybody in the Tsarist Russia. Jews can't win. When the communism begins, the Bolshevik Revolution, you have the Red Army and the White Army. This happens later. The White Army claimed the Jews were on the red side, and they killed them all over the place when they had the war against the Reds. And the Red Army killed the Jews on their war against the whites, claiming that they were supporting the whites. Whenever you have a problem, my friends, you know who to blame. Aha! Here we are. You can blame me. Anytime. You got a problem? Blame me. Hello, you got a problem? Blame me. Call 1-800-BLAME. Okay. So you're living. Everything is going bad, and the economy is bad, and nobody is supporting you from your neighboring Arab nations. You blame the Israelites. Okay, that's good. 1870 now begins big problems. 1870 begins. Because, okay, so now you have a land where for hundreds of years now, Arabs have been living in Israel ever since the conquest of Israel back in the 7th century by the Muslims coming in. I'm not saying that Arabs didn't live there before then, because I'm sure there were Arabian tribes living there before then. Just like Arabian tribes who live in Israel today, who are no trouble to the Jews, and who are allies to us, and who even serve in our army in Israel. Like the Bedouins, like the Druses, and other Arabian tribes who live in Israel, who are not in any political conflict with us, and who benefit, health benefits, they get free, I don't know what they get free, I don't know, nobody gets anything free there. Maybe free car rental once a year. So in 1870, the first migration from Europe in mass begins. In mass meaning like maybe a couple dozen. Because before then, Jews were always coming to Israel when it was under other people's rule, except they didn't come in droves. They just came like individuals would make their way. Maybe life is better in Sfat, but it wasn't really, because there were pogroms going on in Israel as well. But now in 1870, Jews in Europe who have had enough of the Russian pogroms against them are organizing. This is the beginning of what is going to be called eventually the Zionist movement. A movement of Jews, not necessarily out of a spiritual connection to the land, but out of a survival connection to the land, are organizing to come and settle. Joining them are also religious Jews who have always, through the centuries, had a religious, spiritual yearning to come to the land. So this mixture of multitudes begin this migration to Israel in 1870, and the first settlement from that kind of migration happens. They come to the land of Palestine, because all the Jews, by the way, are Palestinians at this time. So the land is called Palestine by the whoever's ruling the place, the Turks, the Brits, the UN, whatever. There's no UN yet, I'm sorry. It's Palestine. So all the Jews are Palestinians. In fact, the Jewish newspaper in the early 1900s was called the Palestinian Post. Today it's called the Jerusalem Post, right? But it was called we were all Palestinians. And so then the Arabs, the Jews, whoever was living there was a Palestinian. So now a new settlement begins. They buy land from the Arabs who are living there in order to farm. Because how else are they going to survive? They can't find work. There are very few opportunities for Jews to survive in their own land under other people's reign. Mikveh Yisrael, that's the name of the first settlement, 1870. And eight years later, Petach Tikva is founded by another group of migrants. In 1882, another 10 years later, or less than that, what's that, 4 years later, Rishon LeZion is founded. That's where there was a recent bombing. Right? This is called the first Aliyah. The Jews of Algeria at that time are attacked in anti-Jewish riots in a series of pogroms that last several years. Hundreds of Jews are massacred, and sacred vestments and Torah scrolls are desecrated, synagogues are plundered. The tragedy against the Jews continues in other Arabian countries. In 1884, Gadara is founded. In 1890, Rehovot and Hadera are founded. In 1890, when there was a big, massive Russian pogrom going on, there was a big migration between 1890 and 1891 from Russia. In 1897, Going back to what's happening tragically, Jews of Mostaganem in Algeria attacked. 1904, the second migration begins. 1909, Degania and Tel Aviv are founded. 1917, the British capture Jerusalem from the Turks. We're trying to go home and everybody's fighting all of this. 1919 to 1923, the third Aliyah, third massive migration from Europe, of Jews trying to get away from the persecution in Europe, Eastern Europe especially, are migrating to Israel through this movement that is growing called the Zionist movement, which is not even a political movement, it's more of an agricultural movement, based on our need to find a place to live in peace. 1920, British rule Palestine. They take over, they rule Palestine. What happens now in Palestine and Israel? Arabs begin to riot in the Galilee. Jews are slaughtered, settlers. 5 are killed in Passover in Jerusalem, riot by itself. The Haganah is founded. Haganah is from the word Magen, which means protection defenders. The Jews in Palestine, these settlers from Europe, along with Jews who've been living there all these centuries, generation to generation, now organize to defend themselves. They've had enough of this. In Europe they get killed, they come to their homeland, they get killed. Now the Haganah, which later becomes the Israeli army, many years later, is founded. And the conflict is now slowly brewing and beginning. Why are the riots taking place? The riots are taking place because the Arab population, which is probably a majority at the time there, which have been living there for all this time as a majority under various rules, Turkish rule and Mohammedan rule earlier, they don't like this migration coming into land that they feel is theirs. So in 1929, there's a big riot about the Western Wall. 60 Jews are massacred in Hebron, more in Sfat, many in Jerusalem, over a conflict over they did not want the Jews going to their wall, the wall of their holy temple. We have no power. We're coming home, we have no power. We never had power. So whenever it was under anybody else's rule, hardly a Jew could get to the sacred sites of his people. When we took over later and became a state and all that, and then in 1967 captured these sites, we opened it up to everybody, Muslim, Christians, Jews, whatever. What's the big deal? 1934, 75 people are massacred in Constantine, Algeria. 1936, 18 are killed in riots. Riots are now breaking out across Palestine. Let's forget about the other Arab countries. 1936, there's a big riot in Tel Aviv against the Jews. Part of a 3-year period of pogroms in response to the wave of migration. Increasing population. Approximately 500 Jews were murdered during this 3-year period. In 1938, the Jews organized to defend themselves even better. But they have a problem. The British are ruling. It's a kind of, you got to work the political way, and now the Jewish terrorists evolved in terms of sabotaging British rule in order to be able to defend themselves, and for a second reason, which is refugees are coming in now trying to escape the oncoming Holocaust in Europe. And the British are not letting them in, because the British are giving in to the pressures of the Arab population, or leadership, I should say. I don't know about the population, because when you talk to regular Palestinian people or Arabian people, they're really sweet, just like you and me, except for the people who didn't show up here tonight. 1944, 1945, this is like during the Holocaust itself, all the way to the end of the Holocaust. Refugees are being, who are escaping, or who are smuggled out, or who are bought from the Nazis with millions of Jewish dollars from America and elsewhere, are being smuggled on boats and snuck into Israel. The British sink one boat, the story Exodus, that's based on an actual historic accounts and events rather. And then what happens is that those that are caught are sent back, or sent to Cyprus, sent to Cyprus, and some of them do end up back there in Europe, depending on the stories you hear, But the fact is that a lot of them were sent out or rejected. The British did not let them in. The Haganah now becomes the Jewish Defense Force, this illegal little Jewish army that then now fights the British for refusing to let the Holocaust refugees enter. In 1946, the British deport illegal immigrants, Holocaust survivors, from their own homeland to Cyprus, as I mentioned before. And in 1947, the UN General Assembly divides Palestine into Jewish and Arab sovereignties. The Jews say, fine. The Arabs reject. The Jews are attacked in Palestine and in Arab countries. 75 are slaughtered in Aden, 6,000 flee Syrian pogroms. We don't know how many were killed there. In 1948, the British say, we've had enough. We're evacuating, and they did. Palestinian Jewry, having accepted the UN partition, declares statehood and is immediately attacked by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia. Ta-da! Right? That's what, 7? Riots break out in Arab countries in addition to this, in response to this Jewish conquest of the land, which is not happening. The Jews are not conquering the land. They're not invading the land. They're just going home. And they've been home all the time, except their cousins and uncles and aunts are now coming. You know, like the Native Americans, right? I invite one guy for supper from the res, and he brings his grandmother and his father and his uncle and his sister and his brother's girlfriend and the family dog's former master and his family. Do I complain? No. This was his land anyway, where I live. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm glad he lets me live there. So this is what's happening. So in response to the establishment of the State of Israel, the State of Israel is attacked by 7 Arabian nations who are already established, and riots are also breaking out all across the Arabian nations. 120 Jews are killed in Cairo alone. Hundreds of thousands of Arabs in Palestine are now fleeing during this war, right? Because the Jews are winning the war. So as they see the Jews winning the war, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians flee. A lot of them stay, and a lot of them flee. They flee. Why do they flee? They flee because most of them are told, of these people who fled, are told that and promised by the other Arab nations that don't worry, the land will be yours. Let us do our work, we'll do this war, you'll have this land back. So they flee to get out of the way of the war, and about 2,000 Jewish civilians perished in that war. And other people ran away because actually they were in the way. They were in the crossfire, and they thought the Jews would come and kill them. And maybe they were. Who can tell? You know, I was speaking to my friend Sheikh Ali Saleh Muhammad Hussein, the Palestinian Arab living in the West Bank. He was a very close brother to me. Whenever I go to Israel, I go to the West Bank. Or at least these days I couldn't, so I had to sneak him out and in, and that was hard to meet him. But I spent a couple of days with him, eating with him, praying with him, everything. So anyway, I had always read and heard about how Palestinian children are growing up with literature and education and propaganda, you know, about hating Jews. And so I asked him about that, and he said, well, the fact is, only to very recently, was afraid of Jews. That they were going to come and kill me, and my children. Yeah. So, anyway, I think they changed the educational thing recently, before the Intifada, but it's too late. People have grown up having this image of the Jewish people out to get them. So now we come to so everybody's going crazy in Arab countries, Jews. Okay, listen to this. This is so beautiful. I have to share this with you. This is such an incredible piece of this history that a lot of people miss because we're not reading history, we're just reading newspapers who are teaching us history out of the context in a vacuum. So here's what's happening. The Arab nations, these Arab nations who are attacking Israel, this little state that just started, because of this mass migration coming in to this land that they don't want the Jews to have too many people in there. Do you know that a great bulk chunk of those immigrants that came to Israel during that time were coming there from Arab countries who were persecuting them. Had these Arab countries let the Jews live in peace and not oppressed them and had all these pogroms going on, these Jews would not have fled Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Sudan and Egypt and other places in that time to come and increase the population in Israel. You would have had 3 Jews there with a slingshot, and that would have been it. I'm exaggerating, but you know that what contributed to the sudden mass migration, I mean, you can picture how if people living in the land, and all of a sudden, okay, so there are Jews here all the time, that's great, it's a given, these Jewish people. All of a sudden, lots of Jews are coming in. It gets scary, to a bunch of people who have a particular way of life, a particular road to walk on, a particular village to visit, that suddenly there's a mass migration. It gets really scary. You can understand that. Emotionally, psychologically, I can understand that. What I can understand is, why they don't understand, that a great part of the sudden migration rather than the gradual migration during this time is because of Jews having been oppressed in the Arab countries. When they heard there was that Israel became a state, a lot of them fled and said, hey, we have a place to go to now where we can be safe. We have our own country back. We have our own sovereignty back. We're getting out of here. And so by the hundreds of thousands in one single year, people fled Yemen, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, anywhere where they were oppressing Jews, except for Morocco. Morocco, that had oppressed the Jews so many times, as we read before, under the new king Hassan, became very good to the Jews. Not many Jews left. And many Jews who did leave still go back there to visit. Now, 1948, okay, the Arab nations take in the Palestinian Arab refugees, right? They're refugees now from the war that they didn't think the Jews would win. So the Arab nations, as good brothers of their fellow Arabs and sisters, take in the Arab refugees, the Palestinian refugees, and they place them in refugee camps. What does Israel do to Jewish refugees from the Arab countries? Do they take them and put them in refugee camps? What does Israel do to Jewish refugees from Europe? Do they put them in camps? No. They're your people. They're your family. They absorb them into their infrastructure, into their society, into their economics, into their health system, without question. What's the question? Of course. But now we have refugee camps. And they stay there for a long time. And it's very sad and very tragic, these refugee camps. In 1949, Israel is admitted into the United Nations, moves its capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Of course, it doesn't have Jerusalem all, but whatever part of it does. Okay, 1949 to 1951, Israel agrees to a ceasefire with Egypt, and with Jordan, and with Lebanon, and with Syria. And mass migration continues. Many from Arab countries from which they have been expelled by the Arab countries themselves. They're expelling our Jews because we don't like what's happening in Palestine. Well, great, then Palestine will become even bigger, full of Jews, more Jews, create more Jewish migration by expelling them and persecution. In 1953 to 55, terrorist attacks begin. Terrorist attacks against the Israeli civilian population is not a recent thing. It's been going on for it's been going on since the early 50s. When I was studying in Israel for 3 years back in 65 and 66, 67, 68, it was commonplace. Everyone knew, and I mean every day there was shooting, shelling, people getting killed on kibbutzim that were near the border. This is before the 67 war when the occupied territory began. We had just that little strip there, and we were being attacked all the time. It was just totally commonplace. People were used to it. That's how sick it was, because it had been going on since 1953. The terrorist attacks. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. We didn't call it terrorism back then. It was called infiltration. Pardon me. It's so interesting. When I think back to the media reports and how we labeled it back then we called it infiltration. But after a while it becomes terrorism. So, and Israel responds, and it's back and forth, and there's back and forth, and there's soldiers on the border. You go to work on the kibbutz back then, you always saw the kibbutzers walking around with rifles every day, every night. Their bomb shelters to go into because the rockets are coming from Lebanon, they're coming from Syria, they're coming from Jordan day and night, and it was just a regular thing. You knew that if you lived too close to the border, you get attacked. Guard duty. We were on guard duty all the time, picking tomatoes in the day and doing guard duty at night. Infiltrators would sneak across. 1956, reacting to the attacks, which had cost 1,300 civilian lives since 1946, earlier, and responding to Egypt's blockade of the Suez Canal, preventing Israel from getting any boats coming in, Israel attacks Egypt and captures Sinai. And what does Egypt do in response? Besides fighting a war, expels its Jews. In 1957, now we have more immigrants, more people in our army, and everything is great. This is wonderful. Keep expelling them. We got plenty of room here. In 1957, a year later, Israel leaves Sinai. Goodbye, Sinai, because of the United States pressure. U.S. pressure, Israel leaves Sinai. Gaza Strip is now patrolled by the United Nations. The United Nations reopens the Suez Canal. Everything is peaceful and quiet, except for the, of course, shells are coming. Well, we get used to that. It's not a big deal. Now we learn to pray, moving our bodies. You didn't know that was the reason? Well, you guys are really ignorant. 1964, delegations from the Arab countries with Palestinian refugee camps. Delegation from Arab countries who have the Palestinian refugee camps in their midst. What do? They meet in Egypt and establish the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. This is a way to solve the refugee problem. Instead of feeding them and taking them into your infrastructure, into your society, why don't you keep them in the camps, keep them angry, keep them hurting and lost and disconnected from everything that they've always known, and arm them. That's a good way to get Israel into the Mediterranean Sea. I had this dream the other night, I think it was last night, not sure, and I was singing a song, together with a Palestinian. We were singing together on a stage. This land is your land, this land is my land, from the Golden Heights to the Mediterranean. It was a really good dream. I hope that happens one day. Me and the Sheikh will dance together in the streets. So what happens is that the PLO is now founded to organize army of Palestinian refugees to attack Israel. And there's a gentleman who takes charge of them, a sweet man. His name was Arafat. In 1967, Israel is sleeping, listening to the sound of music and shells from the infiltrators, as usual. Life is just very usual. I was there at the time. I was studying in the yeshiva. We studied in the yeshiva. My yeshiva was like a Jewish spiritual school where they train crazy rabbis. So actually we didn't train to become rabbis. We just studied and because we were holy. And then they ask you, do you want to be a rabbi? I want to ordain you. You're a nice guy. So we're studying, and all of a sudden, the radio, the things are blaring, the sirens are going. We had already cleaned out the shelters, and we went in and stayed there. And then we came out and made more sandbags and helped the soldiers, brought them lemonade and Tootsie Rolls and bazooka bubble gum. While this was happening, Israel was attacked on all sides by, 7 Arab nations? You know the Six-Day War story. But Shabbat, it's a holy day for us, so by Friday night, sundown, we were finished with the war. We had repelled the attackers, the Arab nations that attacked us, and we ended up with, territories. We didn't go after it. We're trying to just mind our own business. We had no access to our Wailing Wall. We couldn't go to the old city of our people that we built, that we lived in for thousands and millions of years. We couldn't go to the site of our holy temple, very sacred to our people. Long before Muhammad and long before everybody in the world. We couldn't go anywhere. But it was okay. We had supermarkets, we had health insurance. Life was okay. So we got attacked. We fought back. We ended up with territories. We ended up capturing the city of Jerusalem in fighting and pushing back the enemy across the Jordan. And this is what we did. We proposed for negotiations to these nations that attacked us. The Arabs rejected. The nations rejected. Nasser, a guy named Nasser, becomes Prime Minister of the United Arab Republic and vows to continue struggle against Israel. He's the Egyptian Prime Minister. This all happens in 1967. In 1969, a terrorist bomb explodes in Jerusalem supermarket. Egypt begins daily shellings across its border. 9 Jews are publicly executed in Damascus. The beat just goes on and on. Meanwhile, the infiltrators are still going on. That didn't stop after the 67 war. That was still going on before the war, after the war, whatever. In 1970, several Jewish families are massacred in a settlement called Avivim. Not a new settlement, an old settlement that was in Israel. Border attacks escalate from Golan to the Suez. Libya confiscates Jewish property. Terrorists hijack 3 jets bound from Europe to New York. Don't you sing when you read news like this? I do. 1972, terrorists massacre Israelis at the Lot airport. 2 athletes are killed at Olympics in Munich. 9 hostages are murdered. In 1973, Egypt and Syria attack on Yom Kippur. That's the Yom Kippur War happens now. All of a sudden, Yom Kippur, we're in prayer, we're fasting, we have no food, we have no drink, we have no energy, we're praying, and we're attacked by Egypt and Syria, and they're repelled only after a month-long war that cost Israel the lives of 2,522 soldiers. Unfortunately, the Arab armies lost 18,500 soldiers. In 1974, terrorists massacred Jewish civilians in Kiryat Shmona. 16 teenagers are slaughtered in Ma'alot. 70 more are wounded during a hostage takeover of the school by the infiltrators. A family of 3 are shot entering the village at the time. Jews are attacked in Damascus again. Many Jewish women are abducted in Damascus, Syria, raped and murdered. In 1975, bloody fighting in Beirut happens between rival Arabs, right-wing Christian and leftist Muslims. 40 Islamic nations meet in Saudi Arabia that year to vote for what? To expel Israel from the UN. Okay, whatever. That's your priority. The Christian Arabs and the Muslim Arabs are killing each other, and the most important thing on the minds of the great leaders of the Arabian nations is to expel Israel from the UN. 1976, pro-PLO terrorists hijack Air France jet, hold 103 civilians hostage in Uganda. You saw the movie, Entebbe. Israeli commandos rescue them. Yay! Syrian troops, Lebanese Christians are still battling with Palestinian guerrillas now, and Lebanese Muslims in southern Lebanon. Everything's falling apart in Lebanon. Syria is like moving in to take over Lebanon. They take Beirut, they take Tripoli, they take Sarda. In 1977, there's hope now, ladies and gentlemen. The sound of the angels now come in 1977 because Egypt has a new prime minister, Anwar Sadat. Israel has Menachem Begin, and the 2 hold hands and dance the dance of peace. He visits Israel, Sadat does, the first by any Arab nation leader since the state was founded in 1948. In 1978, they win the Nobel Peace Prize, and they go on a David Letterman show. Israel seizes a buffer around southern Lebanon. Israel's moving into southern Lebanon now because they're tired of the shelling that goes across the Lebanese border into northern Israel, attacking Kibbutzim there. Terrorists are infiltrating Israel from southern Lebanon, attacking Jewish civilians. Arab League uses force to separate the warring Syrian and Christian militia forces finally. and in Lebanon, and Begin and Sadat agree on a framework for Mid-East peace. 1979, Begin and Sadat agree on Camp David peace treaty. Egypt is, what happens to Egypt now that she agrees to have peace with Israel? She's expelled from the Arab League. Terrorists now attack civilians in Kiryat Shmona and Nahariya, again, up in the north. Fundamentalists take over U.S. Embassy in Iran, 52 American hostages. Do you know that story? 1980, Sadat establishes diplomatic relations with Israel. What a great man to brave that. In 1981, he's assassinated. Well, of course. What's the big deal? 1982, Israel returns Sinai to Egypt. Oh, by the way, the press of that time, I looked at the newspapers of that time. In 1981, when Sadat was assassinated for making peace with Israel, the fundamentalists rejoiced in Lebanon, Syria, Libya, Iraq, Iran. Iran releases hostages that year too, by the way. In 1982, Israel returns Sinai to Egypt as per the agreement, even though Sadat is gone. They also invade Lebanon while they're at it, because, you know, we're tired of it. The PLO flee. The PLO runs away. Arafat is given safe escort to Tunisia and signs a document accepting the UN resolution on Israel's right to exist. He signed a document. Lebanese Christian militia slaughters 800 Palestinians in 2 Beirut refugee camps. There's old controversy about that, whether Sharon, who was in charge, allowed that to happen, didn't try to stop it. But whatever it might have been, this is what happened. Lebanese Christian militia slaughtered 800 Palestinians in 2 Beirut refugee camps, Arab against Arab. Terrorist bomb explodes in Tyre, killing 100 Israelis. 1983, Jews are attacked in Tunisia. Well, guess who's there? The PLO had been moved there under safe escort. Synagogue is burned. Goodbye, synagogue. In 1984, Israel leaves Lebanon. Ethiopian Jews arrive. They're allowed to leave Ethiopia, where they've been persecuted for a long, long time. And terrorist attacks in Tunisia continued, and during a Holy Day service, another attack happens. 12 people are killed. 114 Jews are wounded in the synagogue in Tunisia. And passengers at airports in Rome and Vienna are attacked, Israeli passengers. Terrorists hijack Italian cruise liner, hold 450 people hostage, murdering one American because he is Jewish. 1986, terrorists slaughtered 21 people in a synagogue in Istanbul during a Sabbath service. In 1988, Palestinians in the occupied territories stage an intifada, the first intifada. Syrian-backed terrorists explode a bomb aboard a Pan Am 747, killing 270. In 1989, hundreds of Arabs are killed in shelling between Christian and Islamic militias in Lebanon. And the beat goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on to this day. The reason why I'm doing this, I hate doing this. I'm a peace man. I give money to my Palestinian friends who are having a hard time economically in the West Bank because of the whole thing that's happening. They can't go to their jobs in Israel. When I was in Israel, I taught, I did seminars, I did workshops. I took all of my money, it was hundreds of dollars, close to $800. Wasn't much, but don't have much money there. And I gave it all to the sheikh to distribute to poor families. And I'm not the only guy that did that. There are lots of Israelis who are doing this in Israel. There's a whole organization called Bustam Shalom, that sends food in, smuggled food in even. Because, it's hard to get food in. The Israeli army has to have their policy to protect themselves. And sometimes it might sound very crude, and there are Israeli reservists who are refusing to be there, and they have their reasons and everything. But the fact is that there are Israelis, Jewish people, who are working very hard to do what they can. Wow, I was reading in the Jerusalem Report that one of the victims of one of the suicide bombings in Israel, so his heart, they were able to take the heart out for a transplant, and the family said to that Palestinian woman, There were all kinds of people in the hospital waiting for a heart transplant, and they gave it to a Palestinian woman who was waiting for a heart transplant. What in the world is she doing in an Israeli hospital anyway? Oh, there's no other hospital that people can get these things done. She can't go to Saudi Arabia unless she's in the camp, and there's no hospital there. So there are things like that that you don't hear about, you don't read about. They're not going to make the pages of the press, because the press is not interested in that. The press is interested in who has the glorious photograph, and most of them, and who can show it first. And you saw all the camcorder carrying members of the press, my friends, are running around in Jenin and other refugee camps where the Israelis had been sieging and looking for gunmen and terrorists, right, going house to house and getting blown up. You know how many Israeli soldiers have been killed because they did not just go in and bomb the place in the beginning? They really tried to go in house to avoid civilian casualties, and they got booby-trapped and bombed. You don't read about that, of course. So the camcorder people are running around, from the CNN and CBS and CBN and I don't know, KBN, or what's CBN anyway? A Christian Broadcasting? No, they don't do that. They're pretty good. And everybody's running around with these people, camcorders, and they're showing all the details, bodies wrapped in cloth lying there in the Arab streets, and blood and guts, and kids with bandages and with blood, everything. Now, then you go to the news of in Tel Aviv today, 100 people were blown up, or 23 people were blown up by a suicide bomber. You wait for the footage. There's a short footage of some guys running around with yarmulkes back and forth, scurrying, to get help. And then there's maybe a stretcher going by with a guy that had an ingrown toenail. All the gory stuff is not there. The people who had lost their limbs are not there. The people who are being pulled out of the rubble, arm piece by piece of their body, is not there. I was there in January, late January, when the first lady, female Palestinian bomber blew herself up in Jerusalem. I just came back from the Judean desert, went through that carnage to get to the place where I was staying. And it was nothing compared to what they showed on the TV in the States. It's nothing. Or in the newspaper, nothing. Do they show Jewish women, orphans and widows crying over bodies and banging on coffins? No, they don't. Because, they're over there, only on the other side, showing what has become politically correct, the victimization of the Palestinian people. I'm not saying that Palestinian peoples are not victimized. Oh, they are. They're totally victimized. But we're not the ones that are totally responsible for that victimization. You have to, and I have to, and everyone has to know that the news we read in the print is very, very lopsided, number two. But number one is a news and information that's taken so out of context of the history of what's been going on long before the Intifadas, long before the settlements that they claim is causing all the trouble. I don't agree with these settlements. A lot of Israelis don't agree with these settlements, and hopefully a lot of them will get disbanded. Some of them we do need out there because we need to defend ourselves, and some of them are excessive. And Israelis are admitting that. Jews are not afraid to admit they're wrong. Jews are not afraid of self-criticism. A lot of Jews were criticizing Israel for the way they went into the Jenin camps. And that's a beautiful thing, that we're self-critical, that we look at ourselves, we're not afraid to criticize ourselves, but it's an ugly thing to only do that and not look at the big picture and understand both sides of what is happening. Not to take the information we get and the propaganda we get out of the context of the history within which it is encapsulated. So it's like my friend, I have a friend in Philadelphia, I have a friend in other places too, and she put it this way. She said, the Jews don't own the media, anti-Semitism does. Look at the presses in Europe. What's happening in Europe? Synagogues are being set on fire. Jews are being attacked. in Holy Europe because of what's happening. And it's the same history, but I just read to you all over again. If something is wrong, it's the Jews' fault. And it's like where is this thing of in Britain they equate, in the presses they equate Israel with Hitler's Germany. Now this is a new thing now. Whenever something is wrong, you will call it Nazism, and across the board, everything is Nazism. Condemning the Jews in the new media orthodoxy in Britain. This is from The Week. It's not a Jewish paper. And in Britain, it says it's disguised, of course, as a critique of Israel. Now everyone knows that it is in very bad taste to whine that an attack on Israel is anti-Semitic. I do not regard every attack on Israel as anti-Semitic, and yet most British commentary on Israel is in fact faced and laced with the prejudice. Says one guy complains, why are you calling us anti-Semitic? Just because we're complaining and criticizing Israel, he says. Well, it's a funny thing, says Richard Littlejohn in The Sun. While we in Britain are sensitive to most forms of minority bashing, we always seem ready to turn a blind eye to anti-Semitism. British TV pundit Tom Paulin recently confided to a Cairo newspaper that he sympathized with suicide bombers and hated Jewish settlers. I think they are Nazi and racist, he said. I think they should be shot dead, unquote. Had he made such remarks about blacks, gays, or Muslims, he'd be in jail by now, under our racial hatred laws. But somehow, we never seem to apply these laws to those who advocate murdering Jews. Let's face it, said George Will in the Washington Post, anti-Semitism is the world's most durable ideology, and once again it is flourishing. Why, Britain's newspapers are filled with toxic denunciation of the Jews, and Italy's La Stampa recently featured a cartoon of baby Jesus being menaced by an Israeli tank. The caption reads, "Don't tell me they want to kill me again." People who say the Arabs and their European echoes would be mollified if Israel changed its behavior willfully overlook a central fact, he writes in the Washington Post. 40% of the world's Jews now live in Israel, surrounded by hundreds of millions of enemies who, like Hitler, are bent on their annihilation. That's the real cause of the crisis in the Middle East. This crisis has become the second and final phase of the struggle for a final solution to the Jewish question. How foolish to underestimate the stakes. How naive, says the New York Observer. Criticizing the Sharon government doesn't make one an anti-Semite, but likening the Israelis to Nazis, as critics throughout Europe are doing with great relish, reveals the deep-seated hostility at work here. By invoking the Holocaust, these critics eagerly wash the world's hands of any guilt for that genocide. And they also imply that the reason for the Nazi hatred is now clear. Hostility toward Israel has seeped into the news coverage as well, he writes. When bombers kill dozens of Jewish children, they're depicted as suicide bombers, driven by desperation, not mass murderers. So people complain, well, the Israeli army is not letting the UN in to inspect. Why should they? It's not that Israel is against having observers come in to inspect what happened there. They just don't want the UN the way they want to see a list of the people, because the UN has been not a very good friend of Israel. I mean, look at, I don't know where to begin, but if you read, condemnation after condemnation, little groups of United Nations officials and bureaus, like the UNESCO even, like it says, what does it say here in this paper? I found Palestinians used the mosques in Ramallah to stock missiles and occupied the Basilica of the Nativity, holding priests hostage. Israeli soldiers respected the sanctity of these sites at the cost of their own lives. Okay, now we quote. Where was UNESCO, this reporter writes, Nicholas Simon in Paris, he says, where was the UNESCO, United Nations something, when the Palestinian Authority desecrated Joseph's tomb in Nablus, building a mosque in its place? Where was their condemnation of assaults in over 100 synagogues worldwide? The majority situated in their own country, France. Do you see what's happening? Oh, I love this one. Please listen to this one. Look, we have a little time anyway. You have to listen to this one. This is in Paris. Guess what happened in Paris? A Jewish kid named Tuvia Grossman, a yeshiva boy. He actually is an American Jewish student. So he was wrongly identified as a Palestinian beaten by an Israeli soldier. And he was awarded $4,005 damages by the Paris District Court in a suit against the French daily Libération, and the Associated Press news agency. What was his suit about? Let me tell you what this little Jewish boy's suit was about. The paper had published an Associated Press photo showing Grossman with his face bleeding. As, you know, in fact, he had been molested by an Arab mob and was being rescued by an Israeli soldier seen behind him shouting and brandishing a club to keep the mob away. But the caption, of course, said, you know, Israeli soldiers clothing Palestinians. Now, of course, these corrections, okay, he won his lawsuit, but do you read about it in the paper, the retraction? No. No, you have to go to these little papers, little magazines that digest news or Parisian library extracts, you know? Listen to this. Here's Omar. He's one of the Islamic Jihad bomb makers in the Jenin camp. He was interviewed in Egypt by Egypt's Al-Aram. Okay, so this is what he says in his interview. One of the bombers himself, speaking to his fellow people in Egypt, he says, he brags, we had more than 50 houses, this is about Jenin, we had more than 50 houses booby-trapped around that camp. We chose old and empty buildings and the houses of men who were wanted by Israel because we knew the soldiers would search for them. We cut off lengths of water pipes and packed them with explosives and nails. Then we placed them about 4 meters apart throughout the houses, in cupboards, under sinks, in sofas. Anyway, I don't have to read you all this. Okay, so I think you have some idea of what is going on, what you have to think about, what you don't have to think about, what you have to leave alone. It's just so, I'm sitting at home, I have a satellite now, because I heard this country western song, I live out in the middle of nowhere, that went like this, satellite, satellite, I watch it all day and I watch it all night. And when I heard that song, I had to get a satellite dish. You know, especially since I was a 7-year-old, and she doesn't even know who Barney is. So I'm watching CNN, I'm watching these news channels during this period, and I can't believe what I'm seeing. I'm seeing the same 5-second footage of guys with yarmulkes running back and forth to ambulances with no stretchers in sight. And then I see hours and hours of fresh footage of what's happening on the other side. It's just incredible. You know, there's a guy with whiplash on a stretcher that made it through I saw there's one guy with a camera running around Israel while 50,000 of the media people are out there. I mean, the bias of the media and press and video footage is just catastrophic, inciting attacks, like I said, against Jews and synagogues in Europe. You read the papers. And pitting Jews against Jews, too. Okay. Whereas the news of the Palestinian civilian casualties are skillfully they're very professionally filmed, and a lot of it, how the people are crying over the coffins. What are the Jews doing? Nothing. I guess the guy put his arm back and went home, and the dead people, got up and said, everything's cool. Yeah. They don't tell you that the gunmen who were shooting at the Israelis were cowardly, using civilians as human shields. No, but they talk about Israeli soldiers using everybody else as civilian shields. They don't mention how many of the homes exploded by Israeli tanks were booby-trapped to begin with, that the terrorists set off, as you just heard from Mr. Omar himself. And dozens of Israeli soldiers had been killed. Anyway, now I want to talk a little bit about the spirituality of all this. Okay? I mean, it's been going on, and we can talk about this and who's on first, and go around in circles and circles and circles. The simple civilian Israelis don't want this. The simple civilian Palestinians don't want this.
Was there an anti-Semitic connection that was announced by the network that the Al-Qaeda that had bombed the WTC also? World Trade Center?
Oh yeah, that's right. That we did that. Don't you know? That's what it said, yeah. The Jews did that. How do they know? Because there weren't that many Jews who were supposed to work there that day who went to work. Look, we get up late. We go to synagogue. We got prayer in the morning, and we have to catch a bagel on the way. You know, we get there late. I'm sorry. My father was supposed to go. He works down that area. You know, he's 82 years old. He won't retire, son of a gun. So he was on his way that morning, September 11. He got dressed. He was about to go, and then he noticed my mother getting up. So he decided he would make her breakfast. And my mother said, "No, you're going to miss your bus to Manhattan." I live in Lakewood, New Jersey. So he said, "No, you're up. I'll make you breakfast." So he made her breakfast. He missed the bus. He got on a second bus that was turned around 15 minutes later before they even got near the bridge. So that's why, you know, Jews were busy making breakfast for their wives. And so yeah, we Jews did it, right? We do everything. So anytime there's a problem in the world, I want you to remember that the Jews did it. It's very clear, you know. And I'm sure this will be shown on MCAT and TV. I just want to acknowledge that we Jews are responsible for everything bad that happens. Do you have a headache? Do you have a stomach ache? Did things not go well for you today? Please, the Jews are to blame. And here's one of them. I die, I'm a Jew to blame. I die. Okay, now we go a little bit spiritual, then we have questions and answers. But first I will drink Rick and Nan's tea. So please join me as I drink the tea. Thank you for joining me. This is very important to me. You know, this is my least favorite part or kind of stuff that I like to do. Because I'm a very holy man. I'm one of the holiest men in the world today. By the way, I was written up in Who's Who in holiness last week. So, you know, Rabbi Shlomo Kalabach was a great teacher who died about 10 years ago. He once put it this way. He said, people think that if you have peace, you'll be happy. He says that's totally backwards. If you're happy, you'll have peace. So what we need today, what we need to start, what we need is joy. Joy to the world, all the boys and girls. Joy to the fishies in the deepest sea. Joy to you and me. Okay, I'll stop. It's so easy to allow what's happening in the Middle East and other parts of the world, but especially in the Middle East, because it's affecting us as Americans, it's affecting the Western world, it's affecting us as Jewish people, because this is our connection to our homeland. But it's so easy to desacralize, to desanctify the Holy Land. Very easy. One of the easiest things in the world. It's not a question of who gets the land in the end. Hopefully both will share it. The question is, what is Holy Land? Is that the Holy Land? I mean, like, without taking sides, let's step away from the politics. The fact is, there's conflict there. fact is, there's been conflict there for a lot of centuries. Everybody wants a piece of that land, and nobody seems to be able to hold on to it once they get it, but then somebody else wants it. So when we were there, the Babylonians came, and we came back again, and the Greeks came. They were good to us. Under Alexander the Great, they were good to us. Alexander died, they were bad to us. Because then Ptolemy of Egypt and Antiochus of Assyria fought over who gets it. They were disciples of Alexander, and we suffered in the middle. They take turns ruling us. After they're chased out, the Romans come in. So one thing after that, then Islam comes, then the Byzantine, then Islam, then the Crusaders, is back and forth, then the Turks, and then the Muhammad Ali, which was a good thing, and then comes the Turks again, and then comes the Brits, and it just goes on and on and on. What do they want from that place? What does Holy Land mean? So in the ancient teachings, a lot of people go something like that, like this. Why are the Jews, after they leave Egypt, supposed to wander for 40 freaking years to get to a place that only takes an hour by bus? I mean, if you read the stories, you see the people are coming back and forth from Egypt to Canaan all the time. The brothers of Joseph, the Joseph story, send one brother back, they bring another brother, they go back and forth, they come here. It's taken us 40 years to get there. Moses is taking us on a long, long journey through the desert to come to Israel from the east when we came from the west. This is like doing this, So the ancient teachers tell us like this. It has to do with what I started out with. The word Canaan, means here there is nothing. And if you study the environmental skeletal structure, infrastructure of the land, there really isn't anything there that is not dependent upon the sky or borrowed waters from melting snows of the mountains of Lebanon and Syria, and rivers and lakes that come down from these places and stream through the edge of the biblical border, the Jordan River, through the Galilee, the Sea of the Galilee, into the Jordan, and that's it. These are borrowed waters. Borrowed waters. Any spring that occurs, like in David's time, they built these incredible underground tunnels to bring water from miles away, because there's no water. There's no water that comes from its own source. Water is dependent upon miracle, whether it rains or not, or whether the snows are going to melt in time to give us water for the season from the mountains that are not in the biblical borders of Israel. So biblically, the people were given a land that could not give them anything, that demanded that for their sustenance, for their survival, they had to have faith. To teach the people this, the people are led on a 40-year seminar where there's nothing to eat, nothing to drink. They're led into Death Valley. They're led into a place with nothing. Eretz lo zeroah, a land that has no seed, nothing is seeding, nothing is growing. And what do they eat? What do they drink? Well, water coming out of stones, and the magic wand from Harry Potter, and then there's the manna from heaven, that comes and that feeds them, and birds suddenly appear when they want chicken for dinner because they're complaining. Some people wanted to have meat, and so some birds flew by. They were shooting the birds at the time, and they got them. For 40 years, the people wandered in order to learn how to live in this particular land. The reason why we call this land Holy Land, we consider it a Holy Land. Actually, it never was called Holy Land in our language until recent times. Eretz HaKodesh. Originally, we called it Canaan, Eretz HaKanaan, the land of here there is nothing, Kanoni, here it's poor. Or we called it Eretz HaTzvi, the land of the deer. Or we called it Eretz Yisrael or Eretz Yehuda, the land of Israel or the land of Judah, depends on what part of Israel you were talking about, because the tribes split up after Solomon's reign, and the kingdom of Israel was in the north, and the kingdom of Judah under the Davidic dynasty was in the south, which is now in Jerusalem and the Judean desert in that area. So what's happening here is that this land becomes sacred to us, not only because our ancestors had their vision, Abraham had his vision that this was the land where he was to settle, but more about the reason why Abraham had this vision, which has to do with how to live in life, how we were supposed to model living life, period, was to take place in this land, which in itself, its own environmental infrastructure, modeled how to live. So I can live in a way where I am always focused on the bounty. I can live in Egypt along the Nile. That's why Egypt in Hebrew means narrow, the land of the narrows, because all of Egypt was this narrow strip along the Nile. The rest was the Sahara Desert. Still is. So we called it the land of the narrow, Mitzarim. Tsar means narrow. Mitzrayim, land of the narrows. So when we went there to get food, the last time we went there to get food in Joseph's time, we stayed. Who wants to go back to that crazy place where there's nothing to eat? We stayed there. We got focused on the bounty, and then eventually became slaves. Because when you focus on the bounty, it's a good thing. You get things done. You make advancements in your career, and then eventually become a slave to your career. I have no time, honey. I got a meeting. And that's what happened to the people. When you live in the Holy Land, what that means is it teaches us how to live in life with priorities. And the priorities are about your essence, who you are. Are you who you are because of what you have, the bounty? Or are you who you are in spite of what you have? Even if you had nothing. If everything you had was taken away from you, and you were now in Canaan, dependent on chance, rain, melting snows across the border, would you still be who you are? So this was a great challenge to the people, and they had to go through 40 years of this workshop, this 40-year torturous workshop with this 80-year-old man who finally became 120 because it was 40 years, right? 80 plus 40. And then they come to the land. And of course, there's a lot of bounty there when they get there because the seasons have been good. And then the bounty goes away, and then it comes back, and it goes away, it comes back, and the people are told, if you're going to live responsibly in the land, the bounty will come. If you're not going to live responsibly in the land, the bounty will not come. The earth will not give forth her yield, her produce. And the heavens shall close down, and the rains shall not come. That's what it says. It doesn't say your rivers will run dry. What rivers? Your lakes will run dry. What lakes? They didn't belong to us, and the waters did not originate there in the ones we did have. Sky, the dew, the rain, the melting snows of other places. The haaretz taki etchem, and the earth, the land, it says, shall vomit you out if you don't live responsibly there. So what the spiritual teachers in Israel are doing today, and what some spiritual teachers that I know of from the Palestinian side are doing today, behind the headline, is trying to teach the people, to remind the people of what are you doing? Where's your priority? Why is this going on? Are you living responsibly on this land? So, on the one hand, as Jews, we need a place to live where we can feel safe. On the other hand, we're not really safe there. So the Jews in Israel are being challenged, to ask these questions by their spiritual teachers about living responsibly on the Holy Land. Otherwise, the Holy Land is no longer the Holy Land. if the Holy Land is just filled with fighting back and forth, no matter whose fault it is irrelevant to the spiritual teachers and to the ancient rabbis. They didn't care who did what. When Rome conquered Israel 2,000 years ago and finally destroyed the temple and our commonwealth, the rabbis of that time didn't go and give speeches, like I did, and say, and the Romans did this in 1200, whatever, and 1000, and 2200 or 200 BC, right? And 100 CE. No. They said, our temple is gone. We're at war with the Romans. Our people are being massacred. The rebellion was put down. People committed suicide at Masada rather than give themselves up to the Romans. What does this all mean? And they said, well, it could only mean one thing. The house of God falls. And God is the God and the ancestor and the mother and the father and whatever of all peoples, of all creatures, the creator of the entire world. And the house of God fell. Obviously, it has to do with, not justified by, but it has to do with, we're not getting along with each other. That's what the rabbis 2,000 years ago taught. They didn't say the Romans did it. That was known. It was in the newspapers. They said, we have so many different groups of us, and we don't get along. Everybody's fighting over Sadducees against the Pharisees against the Sadducees, and we're fighting amongst the Pharisees between the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, and disrespect of it. And then the Essenes don't like any of these groups, and nobody likes the Essenes. And then there's the Zealots, and the Zealots want to fight against Rome, and they're burning down the storage houses in Jerusalem. So the people are forced to fight the Romans because they can't stand the siege anymore. The storage houses of food have been burned down by the Zealots. So the rabbis said, you want to just sit here and blame Rome? That's fine. Are you going to just perpetuate what is happening? Or do we need to do some homework? So spiritually, or I don't know what category to put it, but it's important to look at these issues as well. To look inside our own lives and say, hey, what can I do as an individual in my life to contribute to the healing of what needs to happen, to bring the sanctity back to what has been unsanctified through this conflict. That's not a holy land. It's okay, it's Israel or it's whatever you want to call it, but it's not a holy land if you have this going on, no matter whose fault it is, even if it's not anybody's fault, but them other people across the border. All their fault. It's still not a holy land if that kind of crap is going on for years and years and getting worse and worse and worse. It is time, as many teachers are now waking up and telling the people on both sides to look inside, not inside your rifle to see there's not a bullet, or inside your bomb belt, but to look inside and see what do I need to do to change my behavior in my personal life, the repercussions of which are contributing to what is basically madness, havoc. So yeah, politically we can say it's this person's fault, that person's fault. Newsworthy-wise say, yeah, they started it and they did this, and there's a whole history of everything. You want copies? Here, take it, I'll give it to you. That's fine, but it doesn't solve anything. It doesn't solve anything. What does solve is people spreading to each other the need to ask the question, what can I do? And what can you do? What can I do? Is to look at the Jenin or the Middle East conflict that goes on in each of our lives, between ourselves and our husbands and our wives, our lovers, our friends, our community. It's so easy to put everything out there. Blame the Jews for what's going on at home, and people blaming what's going on in Israel to this and that. But we need to believe and have faith, as the teachers told us about the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, that what we accomplish, what we can achieve in the world, what we can affect in the world, has to come from a place of real faith. When I say faith, I'm not talking about God. God could give a good God darn about faith, you know. And people think, oh, you don't believe in God. Well, what's going to happen to you? Like God is so insecure. Nobody believes him. Right? Oh, faith, I mean faith in yourself. I mean faith in life. I mean commitment to being here. I mean a commitment to really effecting a change in life and the way you are with somebody that maybe you have a conflict with. If I have a conflict unresolved with somebody else, I'm, based on these ancient teachings, I'm contributing to that conflict over there. Because I am a microcosm of the world. Like the sages taught, every human being is supposed to say, because of me alone was the entire universe created. What I do in my relationship with somebody else in the world, with an animal, with a person, with whatever, affects all the rest of creation. In the 2nd century, there was a great Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He lives in Israel. Oh, Jews lived in Israel in the 2nd century? Unbelievable. We thought they just got there in 1948. Anyway, so he said, it is likened unto a man on a boat who paid money for his own room on the boat for his voyage. He then takes a drill and begins to drill on the floor. And the other people come running in and say, "Idiot, what are you doing?" He says, "Hey, what's it your business? This is my own room. I paid for it. It's mine. I can do whatever I want to do here." And they respond and say, of course, "Fool, what you're doing in your own life is going to sink us all." The message we have to get out, each and every one, by modeling it, by exemplifying it, is if there's a conflict in your life, in your community, or whatever, do something about it. That's your contribution to world peace. Not money, not demonstrations alone, but actual doing it in our own life. This is what we're teaching the people in Israel. This is what my friend the Sheikh and others like him are quietly teaching the people across the border. Quietly, I say, because as he says to me, his life is in danger. You're not allowed to be a peacenik, you know, unfortunately. So, Eretz Canaan, the land of nothing. A land that demands us to step away from all that we think defines it. Christian holy places, Jewish holy places, Muslim holy places, everybody got a holy place there. Who was on first? Who was there first? Who came second? Who was third? Migration, history, that. Irrelevant. In this land, it's irrelevant. Because according to the teachings of the ancients who lived there and who understood the land and its soul, all these things are so irrelevant compared to the very nature and character of the land herself. She demands of us not stuff. She demands of us heart. As the prophet Isaiah said, Dabru alev Yerushalayim. Speak to the heart of Jerusalem. Not to the mayor, not to the president, you know, not to the city council, not to the village council, not to the Coptic church or the mosque on Dome of the Rock. Speak to the heart of Jerusalem. As long as people are not letting other people go to the place that's holy to them, that is a desacralization of this holy land. The greatest tragedy of this land is the underlying, I don't know what word to use, the underlying abuse and misuse of the right of anyone to live there without living there responsibly. Both people, everybody has to live there responsibly. And if we can get back to that, we can begin to talk about coexistence. But as long as people are thinking this is mine, and this is mine, and this is mine, this is mine, you know, even if that's a historic thing, as I just read to you, it's mine, it's yours, you were there, I was here first, and then you came and you conquered and you took and you distributed my property, and I really belong there and you don't belong there. That's all great stuff, and it's important to know this, to understand the history and the context of what's happening. And underlying all that, it's a greater teaching and a greater importance, which is everybody who is going to live there, coexistence or not, has to learn and remind themselves how to live there. A land that has nothing remains a land without nothing, unless you put something there, something of substance, something of value. Unless you call forth the rains from the heavens and you call forth the fruit of the earth by gardening and by praying. Any questions? Yes?
I want to thank you for your conclusion. For a while, I was actually getting frustrated with what seemed to me to be a persecution complex. You were describing situations for which there are countless examples of governments lying for all sorts of purposes, of the media being manipulated, of common people being taught to go to war when they really, on their own, would want peace. And so I just want to make sure my interpretation of your closing is correct before I'm actually calmed by it all, which is that I believe you are advocating that the earth in its entirety should be treated as a holy land.
I totally feel that as well. In fact, I mean, we do have I wouldn't be up here propagandizing so much as vehemently as I have done tonight, if not for what I understand has been the other side has been heard and we haven't been heard. We have a right to be heard. Number two, what you say is a very important point, because there's a teaching, like for example, after the Babylonians conquered us 2,500 years ago, a great majority of us were exiled. Most of us were exiled to Babylon. There's about 70,000 of us returned about 60, 70 years later to rebuild the second temple under Darius II, who was a Persian king, and who gave us permission to go back and build the second temple. Majority of the Jews stayed in Babylon. Now the great question arose among the ancient teachers of that time as, what is the Holy Land? If that's the Holy Land, Israel, then, hey, we're all being given permission to go home. Let's go home. And then they taught like this. They said, Holy Land is what God said to Moses when Moses was not in the Holy Land. Moses never went to the Holy Land. Moses was in the middle of the desert, standing in front of a burning bush, in the middle of Midian, which is today Saudi Arabia. And God says to Moses, take off your sandals. Why? The place where you're standing is holy earth. So the ancient teacher said, right now, most of us are living in Babylon, and we have flourished in Babylon, and we are growing spiritually here as Jews. This has now become a holy land. Not the Holy Land. That's the Holy Land, and this is the Holy Land. And so a whole new theology begins to evolve out of the first exile that teaches that, and that's a very important teaching. There is no such thing as the Holy Land. A Holy Land is defined, again, by this, what we just talked about, by how you live there. So we were living in Babylon in a way that we were flourished spiritually. The great Talmud comes out of Babylon. The greatest Talmud in the world, the greatest collection of ancient Jewish teachings, oral teachings and written teachings, come out of Jewish academies of Babylon. In Israel at the time, the Talmud is about this big. In Babylon, it's this big. And they used to have this teaching that anyone who lives in Israel and leaves Israel to go outside is like a yohed, one who goes down from a spiritual level. Ooh, you're going down on a lower level. Then they began to apply the same teaching to Babylon. Any Jew who leaves Babylon, unless they go in Israel, is going down. So you see how little by little the teachers are realizing or beginning to teach that concept, that Holy Land means anywhere you live, if you're living there in a holy way. The Talmud says. It is not the place that brings glory to the person. It is the person that brings glory to the place. So thank you. That was a good reminder. Yes?
I wonder, how do you balance the two biblical directives of the one being the holy place and treating it as holy versus the biblical directive for people to be fruitful and multiply in their, living gracefully in this place? And now there's 6.5 billion people, overwhelming this holy place.
That's good. I like that. That's a very important question. I have to admit, when I go to Israel, I'm very sad because of the overdevelopment happening and very natural places being overrun by more and more villages and cities being built, highways being built. They're planning a big major highway to go from the north all the way down to Eilat, which is going to cut through some beautiful desert ecology and stuff. And there are a lot of Israelis who are protesting this and fighting in the Knesset against this and trying to halt it and frustrate it. And that is a sad thing. You see, this is what happens when we forget what it is, on the one hand, what this land is. If you have I can't think of a good metaphor, but let's say, well, never mind. Anyway, so on the one hand, okay? On the other hand, what is happening psychologically is that there's nowhere else to go. It's a desperation coming out of centuries of relentless persecution against our people. We have nowhere we can go that's safe. Okay, we're in America now, it's safe. Who knows for how long? I don't know. Maybe for a long, long time. In Babylon, we lasted a long, long time for living very, very much with freedom of religion until the later religions came in and took over. So what happens is that we are still in the inertia of the Holocaust as the most recent thing, but even before the Holocaust, all the pogroms in Russia, that this land, this settlement, our homeland, our own army, our own defense force, our own borders, our own commonwealth, is something that we are zealously hanging on to and absently continuously building and pouring. It's sort of like a person who hasn't eaten in 30 days, and then they finally get to a supermarket. They're going to buy everything. I do that. I come to Missoula, like 11:30, my plane lands. I'm starving to death, and because they starve you in airplanes now, now they not only don't they give you anything, they take away peanuts from you if you have it. So I'm starving in the airplane. I come here, and I got to wait for my luggage, which is the slowest luggage in the entire country, except for Helena. And then I finally I get to the hotel, and I walk across to the supermarket, crawling and pushing a wagon, and I buy everything that I can possibly find, and I'm not going to eat half of it. And that is what I feel is unfortunately happening. So you have to understand, this is like this. It's not about whose fault what. It's more about understanding context, historical context of everything. So yeah, I complain about it too. It's sad, and it's ruining the land, and I don't know what to do about it except try to make my land feel better. Good question, and it's a good issue, and it's an issue that is being protested in Israel by Israelis who are really concerned about losing natural resources. And on the other hand, the inertia of survival and having to have a place of our own. We don't know what to do. Maybe we'll find an island somewhere like Australia. Does anybody live in Australia? Just on one little piece of it, right? All around. But in the center of Australia, there's nothing really. It's just jungle. Yeah, maybe we can move there. Well, it'd be cheaper, right? But it's a big issue, Rick. It's a very important question. We keep pouring people in there. Sooner or later, we're going to run out of the limited resources. They're talking about desalinization of the ocean right now. We have no water. In Israel, there's very little water. I took some Native Americans there before the Second Intifada. And there was a drought, and the Indians did some rain thing. And And then they left back to the States, and then it poured and flooded Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. This was back in 1999. All the Jerusalem Report, had pictures of floods going across the Yarkon River in Tel Aviv, and these two Indians walked off. And they always do that. They go into hospitals, do their smudging, and then the smoke alarm goes off, and they're just walking out. Our kind of people. It's a big issue. It's a big problem. It's sad. But I don't know what else to do. On the other hand, you have to understand why the continuation is happening and why the people are still coming and why Israel is still encouraging people to come over and live there. It's a very big problem environmentally. It's a small piece of land with that many people. It's going to, and they are running out of resources. I read in the Jerusalem Report recently that in one kibbutz they have developed an indoor way of growing massive amounts of vegetables on shelves. It's like super technologically response to the dearth of resources, increasing dearth of resources. But that's not the solution. That's not holy. We should have the Holy Land. We should have many holy lands. Every land everybody lives on should be a holy land. But this is our land. This is our ancestral homeland. We have a spiritual connection to it. We have a historic connection to it that has been unbroken for thousands of years. And therefore, we need to take care of her. Take care of her.
Hey man, that Duke Slater just took out everybody. Look at him, man. When I get my hands on him, he's dead. I'm gonna clean him up. You know it. Hey, the fight's over. Where's Guido at? I don't know. That Duke Slater's getting everybody. Look at him. I'm gonna kick his ass when I get my hands on him. Yeah, man. I'm gonna clean him up. You know it. Hey, look, the fight's over. Where's Guido at? Oh, Guido! That Duke Slater's taking everybody out. Hey man, look at him. I can't wait to get my hands on him. I'm gonna clean him up, man. Oh, you know it. Hey, the fight's over. Where's Guido at? I don't know. Guido! You guys looking for that